Be back here. How nice it is to see Pendleton Hall full of people. Kind of like the good old days when we used to require attendance at chapel. Remember that? Fill this place right up. And I like that. I have a great affection for this place. I taught here all 10 years and loved every minute of it because I taught biology from a theistic standpoint. Where else can you get away with that? So this was wonderful. Now, Ron started with a story. I'm going to tell a story, and I got to keep it really short, but it's a funny story. It has to do with my perception of Swedenborg's scientific works and Swedenborg's theological works, okay? And I've studied them all at this point in my life, yes. But I'm going back to January of 1987. It's when I discovered the new church. So I knew nothing about any of this, okay? Had a science background, and I was ready to roll. So I discovered the new church in Freiburg, Maine. The minister was Dave Reenstra, wonderful convention minister, well-read, good teacher. And I attended there a couple of Sundays in a row. And I knew that I was onto something really, really good. Okay, so I had the occasion to go to Boston to pick somebody up at the airport. And there was a bookstore in Boston for many years, a new church bookstore run by a really wild and crazy guy named Ray Hughes. People might know him. And I bought a book down there by Swedenborg because I didn't have any. Took it home. I began reading it, and I loved it. I couldn't quit reading it, and I couldn't understand it. It was totally incomprehensible, but I knew it was really, really good. So I kept reading it, and I read the whole thing in about a week. And I went back on the Sunday, and I told Dave, I said, this book is marvelous. I said, you're right, Swedenborg is a genius. And he said, Reuben, that's not a book of Swedenborg's theology, that's the fiber. You ever read the fiber? It'll bend your mind. It's one of his last scientific works. And I said, he says, that's not theology. I said, are you kidding? I said, have you read it? No. Nobody's ever read it. I said, yes, it is theology. It's theistic science. I didn't tell him, didn't use that term, but I said, oh, it is. And then he directed me to the Arcana Celestia, and I was off and running. But I'll never forget that. I thought that was just one of the books. Guess what? It is. And so that's where we begin. Okay. Oh, there we go, right here. So where do we go from here? As I said, it's wonderful to be here for all those many reasons. I taught science here for years. I loved it. The students were wonderful. The subject was wonderful. I'm going to put this up on a couple of books. These podiums are made for people of an average height. Okay. Enough of that. We're going to do some theistic science today. All day we're going to do some theistic science. But you got to first ask, what is this? Well, first some background. And here's how things sit right now. I'll get my clicker. There are two and only two possibilities for doing science. There are axioms for which science starts. Okay, there's a couple. Axioms, are self-evident premises. They're statements of apparent fact that cannot be reduced further and on which we build our universe. Those are axioms. Axiom 1 worked. Okay, good. We're off and running. Axiom 1 is in the beginning, there was nothing, and then it exploded. That's the current axiom. Okay. The post-Enlightenment universe has been built on this axiom. It's not just a bumper sticker. Supposedly really intelligent people are selling this magical idea all over academia. Read that. That guy's supposed to be smart. And what did he say? He says, well, in my theory, posits that multiple universes are created out of dun 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 nothing. And I'm thinking, okay, where do we go from here? And let's go to axiom 2. And that is, in the beginning, God caused the universe to flow into being from the spiritual sun, and then it proceeded to unfold in an orderly manner forever. Okay, now I'm biased. As for me, I choose the theistic axiom. But we have to remember, never forget, that the other guy's axiom, okay, is just as axiomatic as my axiom. So our science must be rational, it must be practical, which means understandable, and it must be humble. We can't forget this. Argument is okay. Sharp argument is okay. But we must be nice. Remember, where there is charity, matters of doctrines do not divide. And I put that passage right in your handout. It's important. Think Richard Dawkins. Think Daniel Dennett. Don't be like those guys. That's really the message here. We got to be nice. Which brings us to theistic science. Science done right, so to speak. Now, starting out, we theistic people have some beliefs on which our work is based. First, we believe that all nature is not from nature. We believe that there's a spiritual origin for natural things. We think that science is a good and powerful thing. We love science. We believe that the writings for the new church shed light on how spiritual natural interaction works. And some of us, renegades, believe that Swedenborg's scientific writings can shed light on the same thing. But how, you ask? I hope you ask. Naturalistic scientists tell us over and over, I'm going to put that down a little bit. There you go. Naturalistic scientists tell us over and over that nature is from nature. It's a given. And they're smart. Their science is really good. They've been doing it for 400 years, and it's very powerful. Meanwhile, religious scientists tell us that either the earth is 7,500 years old and creation happened by magic once, or nature was designed by a creator, with evidence for this in the many irreducibly complex systems we see at work in natural things. Okay, that's two things. The trouble is that creationism is a hard proposition to support, all right? And creation science requires some pretty creative reasoning to confirm, all right? Intelligent design science is good. It's really good. But given that nature is designed, they can't tell us how it is designed, not even a little bit. Evolution science is wrong, they say, but we really don't know how it works either. Now that is a big letdown. Other scientists hedge. They say, they talk a good line, but they're like fish. They're like fish. You ever keep fish? I love fish. They swim up close to that spiritual edge, but then they turn away at the last minute to avoid being labeled religious. Why? Well, you know, this could kill a religion can kill a career in science for people. These people talk about emergence of complexity in nature, leading all the way up to living forms and even consciousness. They talk about the origin of life and quantum particles that come into and go out of where nobody knows. And they won't mention a creator. And for those very few who are bold enough to do so, they don't know how it works, not even a little bit. So, where do we go from here? We take science, that good and powerful thing, and we use it for all it's worth. And it's worth a lot. And we don't stop there. First, we acknowledge its problems, its flaws, its limitations where they exist. There are plenty of these. We know that. But remember that humble part. Scientists are a thin-skinned lot. And we don't want to alienate the very people we're trying to attract. We always must remember this. Remember when charity is present, doctrinal differences do not divide. And then we put science to work. All right. Did you ever see a team of horses pulling a heavy load? Just take a look at that and just think of the power in those two guys. Now that's a picture from the Freiburg Fair. I used to live until April. I had a house a mile from that. I finally sold the place. Okay. I used to go there every year, and I loved those horses because that's what I did. Now we take, here's what they do. Those horses, one of those horses is leading the other horse. There's a lead horse, there's another horse, okay? Those horses know which is which. Now that man who's slapping that horse knows which horse is leading and which horse is following. But we don't because they work so well together, you couldn't tell. They look like they're doing ballet, okay? And that's the image I want to leave with you. One's leading, we don't know which, but one of them leads, one follows. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, we go to that other horse there, that white horse of Revelation chapter 6, waiting there in the writings for the New Jerusalem. And we read, I saw and behold a white horse. That signifies understanding of truth and good from the Word. A horse signifies the understanding of the Word, and a white horse, understanding of truth from the Word. Okay, and he who sat upon him had a bow. Signifies that they had the doctrine of truth and good from the Word, from which they fought against the falsities and evils which are from hell, thus against hell. So what are we talking about here? The white horse is for sorting out spiritual truth from falsity. That's what we're doing. Any good science does that. Separates truth from falsity. But in this case, we got a white horse, and he's separating spiritual truths from falsity. Okay, so the state of the problem is this. Here's what we're up against. Sir Francis Bacon, in 1620, wrote a book. And since then, scientific materialism, or naturalism, whatever you want to call it, has been the leading philosophy for doing science for 400 years. It has become the prevailing paradigm, and paradigms are Teflon-coated things. A paradigm is a way of looking at the world, a manner of looking and practicing and looking at the world that is a whole universe. It contains all the facts necessary to answer all the questions. It's self-contained, it's comfortable, careers are invested in it and sustained in it. That's why they're so strong and prevailing and so hard to change. After 400 years, science is really strong. And this has even led to scientism. Whoa. Stronger paradigm yet that looks and acts like a lot like a religion. And that's kind of where we are. Now, the natural sciences have produced the neo-Darwinian synthesis. All right, what in the heck is that? Well, neo-Darwinism is Darwin's original theory, which is based on the two tablets that came down from the mountain, natural selection and mutations. That's Darwin's theory in a nutshell. And it supercharges this with 21st century developments in genetics, geology, molecular biology, everything, zoology. It is powerful. It is a powerful paradigm. The neo-Darwinian synthesis has holes, as does any theory. But since this theory has become a paradigm, and now the paradigm has become almost a religion, it's essentially unassailable. It has become settled science. Hear that term lately? Whoa, once it's settled, it's settled. Now, to make matters worse, and this is sad, vicious attacks by fundamentalist creation scientists from the 60s onward have pretty much closed off all constructive criticism of this synthesis. So we're just kind of stuck. Now, there is the alternative science of intelligent design has emerged from the theistic side, okay, as a theory that denies Darwinism per se, claiming instead that the universe and living things were designed and created by the purposeful action of an intelligent agent. Well, that sounds good. Evidence for this is found in living systems that have no convincing gradual evolutionary pathway, and they're too complex to have come about in whole by chance. Now, some of their examples are excellent. Here's one. That's a clotting mechanism for blood in mammals. For about 6 hours one day, probably in 1978, I actually knew what all of those were. And then I took an exam, and then I slept, and after that, it's just those. But here's the problem. If all of those are not present at once, you got a clotting problem, too much or too little. They all have to be there. You can't plug one in here and wait a while and plug in another one and wait a while. That's the problem. Too many things have to happen at once for this to have evolved according to natural selection, the slow, linear accumulation of single gene mutations. That'll scramble your brains trying to figure that one out. What else? Here's a nice one. This is the flagellum on a bacterium. Look at that, the complexity of that little, they call it a flagellar motor. Look at all the subunits. Look at all the pieces it takes to make that motor work. And they all have to be there at once and work at once. They could not have evolved according to natural selection, the slow accumulation of genetic mistakes. Try running that motor without a L ring or a P ring or those little things that look like firecrackers. Try doing that. It won't work. You have to have them all in place at once. And here's another example. This one drove Darwin nuts, the human eye, or any mammalian eye, and all of its associated structures, which includes the radiations back to the occipital cortex. That's part of it. Okay, all has to be there. It has to come about at once. So that drove Darwin nuts. Enough said about these. There are many, many good examples in nature that'll tell you that the design scientists are onto a good idea. They're powerful arguments. They're hard to dismiss. Their science is good. But intelligent design is only half a program. It offers no mechanism to replace the natural selection that it denies. None. So intelligent design stirs the pot, but does not advance a theistic agenda. And unless you have some plan in mind, never poke a snake. That's just simple. They've poked the snake, but they have no plan. Okay. Now, the new physics, I just picked that picture, it looks kind of like new physics. Okay. Quantum mechanics, quantum wave theory, it presents a totally new scientific paradigm for us. So totally new, in fact, that we have not yet effectively brought that paradigm to bear on problems within the neo-Darwinian synthesis. Here's the problem. It's the age-old problem of paradigms. Scientists, physicists, give lip service to things like non-locality and quantum entanglement and all that weird stuff. And they know it's true, but they continue to work within the constraints of locality using Newtonian computational methods. They just can't give up the old physics. They want a foot in both places. That won't work. We've got to move on. So here we are in the new millennium with two extremes. Runaway materialistic science versus a small cohort of theistic scientists who start from the axiom of spiritual causes for natural things, which brings up a question, a very telling question, which we know has been asked before. How long will you halt between two opinions? Now, Swedenborg answered that question. He said, this is from the prologue to the, we call it now Soul's Domain, Animal Kingdom. You got to find that and read it. It's the very last paragraph. He says, all things at the present day stand provided and prepared and await the light. The ship is in the harbor. The sails are swelling. The east wind blows. Let us weigh anchor and put forth to sea. All right. That was 275 years ago. Sometimes I think we've missed that boat. I think it sailed. It didn't go anywhere. We weren't on it. But you know, most days, I'm very optimistic. I think Swedenborg may have written that for us in this era. So I'm good. I'm good with that. And you need to read it. These days, those days of people answering not a word are over. The scientific and theological principles found in Swedenborg's works, coupled with 21st century good science, have brought us to a new third way, a new philosophy of science of this new millennium. Well, actually, there are three new philosophies. We'll get to the first one first. Aristotle wrote the first one, the Organon, which means instrument, 6 works on logic, an instrument for acquiring knowledge, specifically a body of thoughts, that principles for finding philosophical truths. How powerful was that? Well, we're still using it. There's a second new philosophy. We've already seen it. Francis Bacon's New Organon, okay? 1620. Now here's a new method of logic for getting at natural truths, no longer from philosophical argument, but from experience, from experimentation. Turn the world on its head. Well, now there's a third new philosophy. I'll call it a theistic organon, and it's people now who are working from the premise that there are spiritual causes for natural things. There's 3, there's more. There's Ed Sylvia, there's Ian, and there's me. Okay, we're writing stuff about this. We're doing this new kind of work. Theistic science. It's going to be a new organon. Now, the inspiration for this third new philosophy, well, it's Swedenborg's scientific and theological works. And all of them point to the perennial problem of spirit into nature and spirit's interaction with nature. How's it work? Well, first of all, no atheism allowed, no pantheism, no deism, and especially no magic. This is what drives scientists crazy. They think we're trying to do magic. Well, we're not. So there you go. Swedenborg's doctrines provide a framework for a new spiritual natural paradigm that embraces science in all its descriptive and predictive elegance. But it places in the context of downward spiritual causation. Now, what is this? Swedenborg's doctrines are a downward causation. Causation comes from here and works its way down. Influx, degrees, forms, correspondence. We're going to talk about those. And then science has these wonderfully powerful doctrines that are upwardly causative. We've got quantum mechanics. We've got Newtonian physics, which is still good. And we've got neo-Darwinian synthesis in all of its departments. And there's a couple of doctrines that can go either way. Quantum field theory is a wonderful thing. Non-locality can be applied in some of the problems we're dealing with at the moment. So, All of these then come together and produce this Neo-Swedenborgian synthesis. Now that's a little bit presumptuous. So let's just call it theistic science from a new church perspective, okay? And we'll go with that. This uses Swedenborg's universalizing system to clarify problems and to move past the impasse of scientific materialism and failed theism. It's that wonderful image of two powerful horses hitched together to go the distance. Wow, but look at the horses now. One of them's white. Get that? Hitched up to a brown horse, which is science, just as powerful as the white one. But now, who do you think's leading? That old guy knows back there. He's slapping one of them. That's how you know who's the lead horse. The old farmer just slaps the one that's leading. And so there you have your image. Got a white horse, you got a brown horse. But we're going to find out you need both horses. That's the good part. Okay. So how does theistic science work? It starts with a theistic science catechism of sorts. It's an incomplete catechism, to be sure. It's a listing of statements that imply that they are unanswered questions. This listing is more or less, it kind of covers the waterfront, really, of all the empirical investigations that we're doing, but always from the perspective of spiritual causes for natural things. Now, you have this list in your handout, but you don't have to haul it out, but you have it because it's linked. I'm just going to zip through it. But it's important. This is our catechism. This is what we believe. Spiritual influx is of human form. It flows into nature, and I love this term. Swedenborg first used it in a little treatise on embryology. Formative substance. I like that because formative means it has form, and substance means it's something. It's not nothing. It's substantive, okay? So it flows in as formative substance. Now, formative substance interacts at levels of matter capable of receiving this influx and responding to it, okay? Each kind of matter responds in a different way. Okay, inherent in it is a set of constraining parameters for matter. These establish the rules of behavior for the interaction of matter and energy in the natural world, okay? So we got rules. Next, behavior in this transcendent world of forms I'm going to talk about determines behavior in the quantum world, which determines subsequent behaviors by all these little things, force carriers and bosons and leptons and all those things, which in turn determine the behavior of atoms, which in turn determines the behavior of molecules, macromolecules, and all the way up. Rules. We got rules. Add energy and matter, and this will compound or build up into more and more complex forms according to these same inherent rules. This compounding never stops. Next, Wolfram. We're going to talk about Wolfram, Stephen Wolfram. His scientific paradigm allows for this building up without the traditional regard for the second law of thermodynamics. He says there are programs in nature that spontaneously move towards complexity. And these are likely living systems, okay? Next, there. These rules of interaction, this is the good part. These rules of interaction constitute the human form in nature. They are the creator, which is order itself, manifested in the natural world, accommodated to, and constrained by conditions there. God allows his own rules because he is the rules. Simple as that. Matter responds to spiritual influx as it is able, coming into this human form as completely as it can, or incompletely as it can, according to the resources available to it. The more complex the thing, the more human it will be. Think of a rock, think of a tree, think of you, okay? The more complex, the more human-like it is in appearance. Okay. Allow this system to run long enough, and any planet with the right starting conditions will eventually produce organisms and will ultimately produce human beings with brains capable of supporting minds of 3 degrees, making them eternal beings in the image of God. Beat that. That's the purpose of creation fulfilled. Now you have to use your imagination on this slide because I couldn't make this slide. So I found a picture that worked. Forget the colors, okay? There are 9 of them. That's the good thing. And this, Ian, this just correlates to what you're saying. It's all 9s, it's 3s, it's 9s. All right, that's the 9 things we just went over, okay? Now just keep that in your mind. Each one of these is one of our domains. Each of these premises serve as a subject for ongoing research. All right? And see how these things interact, too. There's a category here to attract scientists of all stripes. In each category, as each category is perfected, the overall model is strengthened. As the model is strengthened, the actual mechanism for spiritual-natural interaction will finally come into view. What results is a hybrid ontology of secular science and theistic natural philosophy. It's the best of both worlds. The good news is that even while working deep within one of these different areas, we're all working together towards a more perfect model of the spiritual origin for natural things. We're building a new 21st century theistic science program.